Oh my gosh! Guys, it's great to see you again. It's been about 4 episodes since I've seen you last. Well, technically I was in the What If Harry Potter Didn't Have a Budget episode, but not for very long, and that's besides the point. Basically, Edwin and Beatnik have been taking charge here recently. And you know what? They've done a great job, but it's still great to be back for Christmas time. But anyways, I've got a lot of things planned. I'm going to do the 300th episode, a Christmas episode, a New Year's episode, and I'm thinking of doing a new series. I'll keep you filled up on what's going on with that. But anyways, I thought to just celebrate this reunion, I would do a Fireside Tales. And the case that I am going to present to you all is a little bit debatable. We're not sure whether what occurred was real or not. I mean, Henry Carrington is certainly a real person, but whether this story is real, well, I'll leave that up to you. And I think the best way is to just start it. So anyways, Henry Carrington was a man that was lost in his words. The words were like a god to him. He was trying to find just the right words to explain his life. For that was the story he was trying to tell. It was going to be his autobiography, and he was looking and looking for the words, but the words seemed fickle to him. They ran away from him whenever he tried to find the right one. And he became more and more depressed as he wrote, and although it was summertime outside, and the flowers were blooming, and the trees were green, he just didn't want to do anything at all. He just wanted to stay in his words. That was his life. But anyways, as he wrote, he realized that he was never going to find the words, that he wasn't meant to tell his story. And he threw himself down at his desk and he began to cry, and he said to himself, how can I live life when I can't even tell my own story? When my whole life was basically for nothing. I have nothing to tell. And he became so depressed that he found himself considering suicide. And soon enough, one night he was sitting down trying to write, and he looked over at the gun on the mantelpiece that he always kept there just in case he ever wanted to kill himself. And he realized that he had nothing left for him, and he walked over and he picked up the gun. Anyways, he put it down on his head. He should have probably written a suicide note or something, but the truth of the matter was that, well, he didn't have anything to say, and maybe it would be a better twist for his life if he just didn't leave anything behind, if he just ended it then and there. What did he have left to say? But anyways, he put the gun down, and he thought to himself of his life and realized he would never find the right words. And as he tried to find the right words, he couldn't, even with the gun at his head. So finally, he pulled the trigger. But nothing happened. The gun misfired. And he threw himself down, overcome by emotion, and began to cry. And he said he wasn't even good enough for death. And he crawled over to the bed, and as he laid there, he prayed to God for some kind of guidance, to show his love for the first time in his whole entire life. And these thoughts buzzing around in his head, rather angry and also rather sad, he fell to sleep. Well, anyways, as he lay there in the darkness, he felt a cold wind blow. And he looked around and he realized that he was no longer in darkness or asleep, but he was in a forest. And he didn't know how he had got there, but he had a feeling that he wasn't supposed to be there. Well, anyways, he started crying out, "Help! Help! Is anyone out there?" But nobody answered. All there was the forest and the snow and the pine trees. Well, anyways, he walked forward and he saw a light up ahead, so he went towards that, and he came to this trail. And he saw all these lanterns out on the trail, and he looked around and he screamed out for help again, but no one was answering. Well, anyways, he sat there, wondering maybe that this was just a dream, maybe that this was all in his mind. And as he stood there, he heard bells, and he looked over and he saw a carriage coming up to him. And there was a man driving the carriage, and the carriage was being drawn by a bunch of horses. Well, anyways, the carriage came right up to him, and it stopped. And the man was dressed in a trench coat, and his eyes were bright like embers. And he couldn't make out the man's face, just those eyes, those bright, piercing eyes looking at him. And Henry Carrington smiled at the man, and he said, "Excuse me, sir, I don't know how exactly I got here, but I've lost my way. Would you mind helping me out here?" And the man just looked at him, and Henry Carrington said, "I'm sorry to ask this, sir. It might sound a little strange, but is this all a dream?" And finally the writer spoke. "You were going to kill yourself, Henry Carrington." Henry Carrington said, How did you know about that?" And the driver didn't answer him for a while, but then finally he spoke, and his voice was very gruff, almost like stone crushing against each other. He couldn't really find the best word for it, but that was the best thing he could think at the time. But anyways, the man said, "Henry Carrington, I know what you're looking for. You're looking for a miracle, something to save you from this plight. You want your suffering to be ended. Well, I will take you on a journey, Henry Carrington. I will try to save you, and you should know that there are not many that receive this reward in life. There are not many that receive this splendid goodness, this miracle of life, where they can see the errors of their ways. Come aboard my carriage, and know that you have been one of the chosen ones, the lucky ones, to be given a new life." Anyways, Henry Carrington didn't know what to make of this, but he realized he didn't know where else to go, and this was his best chance, and he figured he could always jump off the carriage if the man turned out to be some sort of serial killer or something, so he got on board the carriage, and they began to drive off. They went for many minutes, and all there was pine trees and woods and the cold, and as Henry Carrington looked up, he realized that there were a bunch of birds in the trees. First just a few, but then all around him thousands of birds. And the birds were watching him, owls and hawks and all sorts of creatures, and they all had bright red eyes, and they seemed to be staring down at him in judgment. And Henry Carrington grabbed hold of the man's sleeves and said, "What are those? Why are there so many birds in the trees?" And the driver said, "They are the watchers. They are the makers of reality. They've been watching us for some time now, and they've been watching you for some time. They are very judgmental creatures, but they are neither good or bad. They simply are, and that is all there is to it." Henry Carrington didn't know what to make of this response and decided to be silent because he found the man rather strange. He didn't know what to make of him. Well, anyways, they continued on for a couple more minutes, quite some time, until eventually they came across this large snow field, and as they rode along it, Henry Carrington looked out, and he saw a bunch of children out in the field playing. And they were laughing and singing, and they were throwing snowballs and making snowmen, and it seemed like such a delightful sight, and it was the first real humans that he had saw on this travel. And Henry Carrington was about to jump out when the driver grabbed hold of his shoulder and pushed him down. "Do not go out there. Those are the beasts of the forest. They are trying to trick you." Henry Carrington looked and said, "You must be joking. They're just a bunch of children." "I knew of an old man that went out into the forest to play with those children once," said the driver. "He went up to them, and he played, and he did all the things that you see them doing, made snowbands and snowballs, and he thought that everything would be delightful. But then, as he was playing with them, he realized that the children were giving him a hungry look. And then one of the children turned to him and smiled, and the smile was metal, jagged teeth, and all the children turned to him and they smiled with those metal teeth. And the old man looked at them, and he was about to run away, but one of the children ran forward, grabbed hold of him, and bit him. And then all the children came forward and began to bite him, and they dragged him off into the forest, and he was never seen from again." Henry Carrington realized that he was not in the usual place that he should be, and he put himself back down on his seat and said, "Where exactly is this place?" "A place between dreams and reality. A place that cannot be explained. A place that will be your last chance." Well, anyways, Henry Carrington did not know how to answer this. And Henry saw a lot of other things on this travel. He saw bright white lights floating around in the forest, and creatures that he couldn't really put into words. The driver even told him a little of the story of the place, of the high-ordered courts, and the beings that lived there, and he didn't really understand most of it, and thought most of it was silly, and didn't really even remember all of it. I don't know whether that was intentional on the part of this world, or maybe it was just the old man's forgetfulness. But anyways, eventually they came to a lake made of ice, and the driver stopped, and he said, "This is where I'm leaving you. Go on now. There's someone waiting for you." And Henry got off and he said, "I'd like to thank you for taking me so far. It was very kind of you." And the driver looked down at him, and he seemed to almost look at him with fury. But then a soft side to the driver came, and he seemed to almost smile, although strangely enough he still couldn't make out the face. And the driver said, "Think nothing of it. She is waiting for you." Anyways, the driver rode off, and Henry Carrington didn't know what to make of all of it, and he walked over to the lake, and he saw some ice skates sitting there, as if they'd just been waiting for him, and he put them on, and he rode out onto the ice, or skated out onto the ice, I suppose would be the better term. But anyways, he skated for some time, looking around, trying to figure out what was going on. And then he saw from the forest approach a woman, and she seemed a little nervous at first. Anyway, she came out of the shadows, and finally she went out onto the ice with him and began to skate. And the two of them began to laugh and joke with each other and sing, and he found himself younger than he had ever felt in his entire life, younger, he knew, than he would ever have felt with the children. And they singed and they danced with each other, and he finally fell down on his butt, and the girl laughed at him, and then she kneeled down and she kissed him right on the lips. And then she looked at him for a moment and said, "I must be going now." And Henry said, No, I don't want you to go. You can't leave me." And she shook her head. "No, I must be leaving, Henry Carrington. You have your own life to live. Go on, go and live it." Anyway, she started to walk towards the forest, and Henry Carrington said, "Wait, please don't go, please." But the woman was disappearing. "Farewell, Henry Carrington. I will always remember you." And Henry Carrington began to scream for her, but then everything became dark, and he awoke. And he found himself in the cold room, and his fire burning in the mantel, but it was still very cold, even though there was a fire there, and he looked around and tried to realize why it was cold. It was the middle of summer. Anyways, he told himself it was all a dream, and he stood up, and as he looked out the window, he noticed that it was snowing outside. He looked out at the snow and thought it was odd, especially since it was summer, but he decided that maybe it was some sort of sign, and this gave him a little bit of hope. And he sat down at his desk, and he pulled out his pen, and he began to write. And that is all. As always, sweet dreams and Merry Christmas.